means, but we did it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm good. I'm glad that is all working, and we shouldn't question. We have no need to question.
Question. No question necessary.
So why don't we start off with bear with me a second, let me just turn this up. Why don't we start off with just a quick introduction? You start, Mike. I'll follow.
Sure. My name is Mike Rosenfeld, and I'm a high-performance mindset coach, mostly for professional athletes, world champion athletes, but also CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and large companies themselves. And everything that I do is committing to helping people find their unique voice, helping them find their unique strengths, their powers. And where that comes from is understanding identity being how we view ourselves, how we view the world, and how we think we're perceived by the world. And then being able to realize that the identity that we have for ourselves is not based on truth, it's based on beliefs. So we have the ability to rewire our brain and our nervous system by shifting beliefs into a more powerful state. So I call this creating a flow state identity, or a flow code identity, as we discuss it to be. And then once we're able to tap into who we are at our best in full alignment, how do I access flow state on demand? So everything I do is to help give the tools to be able to take the mind, the active critic mind, offline, so that we can step into our unique powers, our unique strengths, and perform and feel at the highest level.
Love it. That is quite an intro. That's amazing. I love what you've described there as well. I'm going to come back to a few of those points in a second. For those that are new to my channel, my name is David Florence. I set up Evolution of Dave in 2018 because it followed an event that happened in 2017 that was effectively a bang to my head, both literally and figuratively, that the very next day caused me to think and act differently about how I wanted to live my life. I wanted to enhance my physical health, my mental health, and from that, lots of wonderful things have come. I'm also now a coach, an ambassador for FGI, Flow Global Initiative, like Mike, along with a clinical hypnotherapist, a NLP coach, as well as a breathwork coach. And I intend for my life really to be this continual journey. At no point will I ever say I've got it all figured out. I don't want to have it all figured out. I like the fact that I'm continually learning, exploring, speaking to people like Mike, developing these skills and methods that I put out and I pass on to you, those in YouTube world, as well as those that work with me as clients, either in the corporate space or individually or on my course. So what I've got some really interesting, that I think are interesting questions that I'll come to in a minute, that I wonder whether we could discuss, especially when linked to the sporting world. What I love about your unique or your USP then is that you're not just taking peak performance as an umbrella term and applying it to everybody. You're saying, yeah, we'll come to that in a second. What I need to figure out first is you, the individual, who your unique personality and traits are, or what they are, and also whether you've accumulated any templates that are limiting your beliefs.
Yeah, well said. You know, I was recently in an amphitheater, and while I was in the amphitheater, the owner of the amphitheater told me to stand center stage. And as I was standing center stage, he said, say your name at a normal tone. So I said, Mike. And as I said my name, my voice carried throughout the entire amphitheater, filled it up, and it was brought back to me. So the place was filled and it was full. It was full and filled. It was full, filled. Those words I'm putting together on purpose. He then said, move over to the left just a little bit and scream your name. I'm like, okay. So I move over to the left, not even a foot, and I scream my name on the top of my lungs. My voice went about 3 inches and got completely consumed and swallowed up by the air. For me, this is the metaphor of life.
Mm.
When we're in our alignment, when we're in our authentic space, when we are in our inner child, whatever we want to call it, when we're in our true self, our voice will carry powerfully throughout the world. And we don't have to work as hard. And I don't mean we don't have to work hard. We don't have to work as hard. In other words, we don't have to force. We don't have to force things. Forcing things comes from a place of scarcity. It doesn't come from that space of abundance and trust. But when we move off center stage, or we move out of our true self, we can scream, we can kick, we can shout, we can do all of these things and try and try and try, but our voice is not going to carry as much. And what does that mean? Well, that means from the time we are younger, especially in America, from the time a child is born to the time they turn 5, they've been told no or don't do that over 5,000 times. So we're born into this world in that centered place in our true self. And then we're taught no and don't do that. So we start developing these belief systems that I'm not good enough. And we go to school and we see all the cool kids, and all of a sudden we need to conform to be someone else. And all these standards that society or our parents put on us. And they may be well-intended, but they tend to move us off center stage and help or cause us to create these belief systems about ourselves that we're less than who we truly are. So as you were describing, David, yes, the work is uniquequal. Everyone is unique, yet everyone is equal in their own way. And my task is not to say there's a one-size-fits-all program that can help you get from here to here. There are some commonalities in all of the programs, but each person has developed their own stuff, their own belief systems that have caused them to move off center. So that's why the work with flow code, and I love the word code, is so important, because it helps crack each individual's unique code that's bringing them out of their alignment. And when I say alignment, what causes us to be out of alignment is that inner critic, that voice of doubt, that voice of judgment. And because of that voice of judgment, we begin to move over and develop a new us. But that new us is always in our head. Am I good enough? Am I smart enough? They're going to like me. What happens if I miss the shot? What happens if this deal doesn't go through? All of these things that would cause us to contract. And we all know from a performance standpoint, we're either expanding, which comes from embracing the challenge, or we're contracting, which comes from resisting the challenge. So that's really the work, to help people expand and let go and be able to be in their most powerful state. So not only they can perform well, but they can feel the joy of themselves and the performance, and ultimately really become a healthier role model to the society, teaching us how to do that.
That you've made a really important point there around joy, because I was having this conversation with my family earlier today, actually, that for those in this country, they will be familiar with the name Johnny Wilkinson, a very famous rugby player who helped us win the World Cup back in 2003. And he was describing in an interview with Bear Grylls had taken him on his usual kind of trip into the jungle or somewhere. And he was describing how for much of his sporting career, he, now retired, was able to look back and think that he didn't enjoy a great deal of it. He enjoyed the results. In other words, he'd reached the top of his game. As far as rugby's concerned, he could not have gotten any better, nor could he have achieved any more. And the whole country loves him. You know, if you're into rugby, you love Johnny Wilkinson. So he's achieved, you would have thought. But he looks back at his time as a player, and he can't find those moments or that many moments where he enjoyed the game. In other words, the one thing that he'd chosen to be his career, to be his life. He remembers the moments when he would lift a cup or when the crowd would cheer. And he also described a flow state moment as well, which was amazing, the way he described it, much like Ayrton Senna does and all the other people that have experienced this. But the point of this really is that I think there are so many people that choose sport as a career. They find a skill. Now that there is this amazing, I think, moment in your life that not many people have, where you suddenly realize, I'm good at this. You have people around you that say, yes, you're good at this. You listen to them, you believe it in yourself, you follow your dream. Then at some point, things get really serious. And the enjoyment is lost because you get wrapped up in the analytical mind of what if, what happens if, and all these questions that send you on another path. And it's such a shame because you could be enjoying that moment at the top of your game, And there are some sports people I look at, and I think, you seem to have it still figured out. I think you're still enjoying it, even though you are at the top. But there are others where I think, no, you've lost it, you poor thing, because you've allowed that analytical mind to take over, and you're getting upset all the time. And so, I mean, it must be a really, really interesting work, what you're doing.
Totally. And
helping
there's a couple facets there's a couple things that you just said that they bring up certain experiences that I've had. I was recently working with a top 50 in the world tennis player, and he calls me from Wimbledon, and he had gotten past the first 2 rounds. And on the phone, he's insanely excited. He was like, oh my gosh, if I win this next round, this is what's going to happen. My ATP rankings are going to go sky high. I'm going to make X amount of money. I'm going to get all these accolades and new endorsements. And like, he's talking and he's super excited. And then in the middle of a word, it's as if somebody had a needle and he was the balloon, and they just popped the air out of him. And I knew exactly what happened. He started having what we refer to as destination disease. He was so caught up on what could go wrong, the outcome, that he was losing the moment. He was losing the excitement in the moment. So the mind does live in the past, which we can't control. So the only time we look back is to learn and have gratitude for the experience. And then the mind also lives in the future, which we can't control. If we can control the future, we just snap our finger and say, I won. All of our power happens in the now. I'm also a breathwork therapist, and the breath, we say, is the master of the mind. The breath is happening in the now, and 70% of our metabolic waste is released through our breathing. And whatever our psychological or emotional state is, our breathing is always going to mirror that. We can shift our psychological and emotional state through our breathing. So I asked him, I said, do you think you can control the outcome of this game from where you're sitting right now? And he contracted because he knew he couldn't. But he had this belief system that he should be able to. Like, he should know that he's going to win. And I said, well, we can't control that outcome, but what would you say are the top things you can focus on in order to give yourself the best chance to achieve that outcome? And then we brought him back to the moment. I can control right now my breath. I can control my thoughts. I can control my attitude. I can control my eye gaze. I can control my body movements. Why is that important? Because whatever our psychological state is creates our emotional state. And if we're in a contracted state, we're holding on, we're tight, and motion moves emotion. So there was a lot that he can control in this moment, but also there's a lot that he can focus on even going into the game. So that's a really powerful thing, because that's how we get our joy back. We get our joy back by being able to be present in the moment. But then in working with a lot of men, really high-performing men, like world champions and CEOs of big companies, what I've come to discover is that, and it's not my discovery, it's pretty common knowledge, but throughout our lives as men, we've been given these standards of who a man should be, what we should think like, how we should show up to the world. So this is that masculine energy, which is yang, and this is yin. This is the pullback. So I always ask the guys, I say, hey, what's more important, this or this? And all of them, not literally all of them, but the majority of them will always say this. And I say, well, what happens if you have too much of this? You fall forward. And what does that mean, to fall over? It means that your health is going bad. Your relationships with yourself, your children, your families are going bad. And they're like, well, what do you mean? Well, because we've been taught as men to be right, but being right is not always effective. So I may be right in an argument I'm having with my daughter, but my needing to be right in that argument is causing a huge divide in our relationship. So I'm being right at my own expense. So that pullback, the yin, actually helps put more power into our yang. It restores our health. It allows us to have compassion for ourselves, our loved ones. It allows us to be present, and it allows us to receive the joy of the moment instead of being so focused on the outcome of the moment.
That is powerful stuff, because also when you're constantly in this yang mode, I would guess it stands to reason that if you look back to your life 10 years prior, very little of it will you be able to bring forward to memory and think about the wonderful times you've had, because you've been too far in the yang mode, haven't you, where it's driven by this analytical thought. The hippocampus isn't probably storing a great deal of memories. It's already being overloaded. So yeah, you're missing out. And I have to say, I've been there so many times. And when we talk about or when you talk about this alignment with yourself, and I talk it about, I visualize this as my new path. The path that I was on before is the one that was well trodden, that everybody follows, that was driven by preconceived notions of who I am, as well as what I believed other people wanted out of me. And then the new path, which is, as you're describing, the alignment with me, is one that I have no idea really where it's necessarily going. And I like that fact, by the way. I visualize on end goals in some respects, but I like the fact that this is just a nice untrodden path. I can't see it clearly, but it's there, but I know I'm on the right one because it feels right. But it's taken me, goodness, I'm 47 now, so it's taken me many, many years to figure this new path out. I'm so grateful I have, but it's taken me a long time to realize it, because I now feel in alignment with who I am. And this is where I've often previously thought those that have chosen in their early years some kind of sport or music or something along those lines, and they've turned it from that passion to a career. And I'm always questioning, do they still have that passion for it? Because if they don't, they must be thinking, I want to bring that back. Because that path would have felt like for a long time it's the right path for them, but they've kind of just gone off track again.
Yeah.
Because they've lost the essence of the reason why they were doing it in the first place.
So we talk about these 5 principles to be able to get it back, if you will, or to be able to live in that alignment. One of them, and these are all framework things, right? And they take some work to really incorporate. But the first one is there's no rules on how things should be or how they must be. When we live by certain rules of, as a man, you need to be this way, or as a woman, you need to be this way, or as this, essentially we're treading down another person's path. And with that path, we might find some joy and excitement in it, but we can actually lose ourselves and divorce ourselves from ourselves. So the only rule is to connect to the joy, to connect to the peace of mind, to connect to the passion. That's what I believe. Another one is to be able to look at it as if each time is the first. So how do I get to see this experience that's in front of me from the lens of, this is my first? And that takes some work. But imagine if I can do that. Some people say live life like it's your last day, before you die. It's the opposite. Live life like it's your first day alive. It's this unique curiosity and wonder. Yeah. The third is that there's no true hierarchy. We're all unique. Comparing ourselves to this person or that person will only limit this person. Right. So when I worked with Novak Djokovic before his game with Nadal, I looked at him and we were talking and I said, you'll never be as good as Nadal. And he looked at me and he was like, huh? Like, what the fuck are you saying that for? I said, you'll never be as good as him. It was an incomplete sentence. It was, you'll never be as good as him at being him. It's all about connecting to your uniqueness and like building off of those core strengths, those core passions, those core purpose, all those things, right? So there's no true hierarchy other than we're unique, and each of us have these unique gifts, strengths, and talents that we get to foster and develop. Another one is always keep it light. Heavy things sink. Light things float. Do we want to be sinking? Do we want to and what are the tools and resources we can use to stay in that space? And then the last is there's a difference between learning and remembering. The child doesn't learn, he remembers. And what that means is we all have this universal intelligence, this awareness, and this keen sense of knowledge and wisdom. And one of my teachers once said, the greatest gift that one of my students can say to me is not thank you for what you've taught me, but thank you for reminding me what I've always known to be true. And so like when we go to flow state and flow code work, like this idea, one of the principles in flow is like, we know that there's 4 channels. So let's take a step back. We know to get into flow, when we're in flow state, we know that the brain waves are slowing down. We know that the body's producing certain chemicals. We can go into the psychobabble or the science babble, but I think for the end user right now, I think it's important to just know, we know physiologically, kinesiologically, what's going on in the body when we're in flow state. And we now know that there are 4 channels to get into it. One of them being our cognitive patterns. And one of the things about our cognitive patterns is when we believe something is our enemy or separate than us, it will own us. So I always give the example of if you have 2 football teams playing and both teams had prepared for a sunny day, which means their playbook and their strategy is only conducive in good weather. So they're throwing the ball, they're flipping it back, they're doing things that you can only do in good weather. And then all of a sudden, second quarter comes in and this huge cloud comes over with massive amounts of rain. One team is contracting like, oh no, and they're getting upset because their playbook is out the window. And the other team is accepting and is like, yes. Well, they're expanding and they're coming from the space of oneness. And that means that there is no separation between us and anything. And in everything, there's an opportunity for us to learn and grow from. And when we accept that and we embrace that, that puts us in a state of inner calm. It keeps us loose. So going back to children, children have this awareness as we're born into the world. But when we're told no and don't do that over 5,000 times, we create this separation from ourselves, separation from each other, separation from our outcome. And it is all one, which means we are connected to everything, which means we're connected to our failure. But we're also connected to our highest level of joy and success. And the only thing that separates us are our thought patterns. So I really like to go into like this whole idea about being in alignment. The only thing that takes us out of it is this idea that we're separate. And we create that separation from ourselves. We divorce ourselves from ourselves.
Yeah, loads of really interesting points there, actually. And I was just thinking then, as you were speaking, that over the last few years, I've certainly rode the roller coaster of life, you know, with the ups and downs. But I'm really grateful for that now, because every time things don't go to plan, I'm much better at just accepting them for what they are and allowing the solution-focused mind to retain or to come up with the answers. But it's only because I've ridden that roller coaster that I'm able to do that. And I think some people have such an easy life for much of their life that when the poo really hits the fan, they find it difficult to deal with it, because already the fight flight kicks in. Their irrational brain is the only bit of the brain that works. So obviously they're not going to come up with any solutions. But I think coming back to children is always a good place to start, because, and it helps if you're a parent. If you have a child, you can see how they view the world. I'm able to see it through my son's 6.5 years old of being on this planet. You're able to see it. You have a daughter, I believe.
She's 6 years old. Yes.
Sorry, 6 as well?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. So we know when you're a parent that you can see that their world is the now. It is the present. It is only ever that. The things that they get frustrated at are not the same things that we get frustrated at, but it's totally because they don't want to be taken out of the now. If I'm playing my game, I am in the world right now. That's my son's Lockie's world is right now in that game. So if I, as a parent, come and remove him out of it, no wonder he's going to be a bit peed off. And so they're very lucky, aren't they? You know, for many years, they're in this theta controlled state of the present moment. And if we can, as adults, at least attempt to get into that state and be with them in that world, then we're going to gain all the better. I did a video recently, actually, where I said, if you're a parent, you have an opportunity. because you might well be working at the computer, really, really zoned in on your work. You might be in a flow state whilst you're doing your work. And when little Johnny or whoever it is that comes up to you and says, "Daddy, will you play with me?" Of course, your initial reaction is going to be somewhat frustrated, one of frustration. But if you pause for a moment and just see what the benefit you could gain by taking yourself into their world, then it's quite likely when you step back into work mode that you'll be flowing better. You might be, you're a little bit more efficient.
No, I love that.
I've got.
Do you have a process? Do you actually have
Oh,
a process do you have a process that you use that allows you to get into that state or allows you to connect to that with your child?
Yeah.
Can you share that
So
with
quite
us?
often it's through the breath. So I'm a big one for using 4/4 breathing, just because it brings that heart coherence, brings a balance between between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. I'm also a big one for making use of the parasympathetic on its own. So in other words, if I feel frustration, then on regular occasions I'll be and extending that exhale to lower my heart rate, lower my blood pressure, enter a calm state before entering that world, allowing my rational brain to kick in so that it doesn't become irrational daddy. So yeah, absolutely.
Irrational daddy is not so effective.
Yeah, no, exactly. It doesn't work. So, or occasionally a bit of anchoring. I've anchored a few things on my hands that automatically can evoke certain feelings, memories.
So these are NLP techniques, correct?
Yes.
The anchoring.
Yeah. You use them in clinical hypnotherapy as well, occasionally. But yes, and they're amazing. It's such a simple tool. It's a bit like there's something else that I use called the gamma mindset, which is very similar, where you end up crossing your arms and your legs whilst saying a mantra, and the crossing of the arms and the legs act as a tool to kind of almost rewire your brain, and it helps to remove self-limiting beliefs.
Great.
Now, I've got a question for you, which is, since learning about the fact that we were going to have this wonderful chat, it's a question that I think about regularly, and it's back in the sporting world. And I'm a big UFC fan. I love watching mixed martial arts. I also like watching boxing, though perhaps not as much as the mixed martial arts, but I still enjoy it if it's a good fighter. Over the years, primarily a fighter will have been prepared by his team by getting angry, by imagining his opponent or her opponent as being the enemy. That they're building up this, come on, and rugby teams, you see them do it. They're all slapping themselves in the face. They're really building up this energy. And on the one hand, I can understand it. But of course, now with what I know and what you know, it really raises this big question. So let's say you are being built up into this energetic state that is, if you're seeing them as the enemy, especially if you're a fighter, then are you not therefore moving your brain into fight flight, which becomes irrational, which means that you're shutting down a large part of your brain that reduces the likelihood of you flowing through the fight? Wouldn't it be better to go into the fight in a calm state, rational mind, therefore far quicker, able to react quicker? Am I right in that assumption, or do you see that there's still a benefit for going, come on?
I don't know the benefit if it exists, other than like getting yourself to feel certain chemicals that are released when you're in that state, and perhaps an addiction to those chemicals. In other words, you might be releasing cortisol or norepinephrine with some adrenaline, and you might like that feeling, that stress feeling. Now, it's a great question. It's definitely an amazing question. So whether or not I like that person is completely subjective, and I might dislike that person, and that likely could put me in a state of fight or flight if I don't utilize the right tools to win. So, for example, when we do work with the high performers, whether they're Army or SEALs or whether it's professional fighters, we take them through a process, and we utilize the breath in posture work. And essentially, there's 3 steps to the process. The first step is called activation. So through the breath, anyone who's done breath work knows that over a period of time, you might feel some tingling. It might create some like unpleasant thoughts, depending on how it's facilitated and how deep you go into it. But when the facilitator is intentionally taking you through the activation phase by bringing up your limiting beliefs, calling them out, this will cause you to contract massively while you're in that activation stage, which is amazing for my work. And the reason it's amazing is because it simulates real life battle. So like if somebody is literally in war, you know, you could say love your enemy in that state, but like when you have that like machine gun like, and you're about to pop their head off, you know, loving your enemy is really not an option because you love your family first or your country, whatever you're fighting for, right? And so what we're doing is we're simulating the real life fight or flight experience, the nerves, the worry that come in that moment. And that's powerful. And we're bringing it up through addressing the limiting beliefs. The next one is processing. How do I process this feeling? And what it means to process it is literally to be in a space that all feelings are welcomed. There's no good or bad. And when we can make peace with our non-peace, we transmute our non-peace into peace. So I have anxiety. Of course I have anxiety. Why wouldn't I have anxiety? I have a lot going on. It's normal to have anxiety. It's a lot different than saying, oh, I have anxiety and start freaking out and adding another layer of anxiety to the anxiety. Yeah. Right. So when we can make peace with our non-peace, it transmutes it into peace. And what that means is we become a lot more fluid again. So as we're doing the breath, we're not right. We're not freaked out. We're actually able to calm and be in the moment. And that's the processing. And then the third phase is the channeling. And the channeling is we've done, like I mentioned earlier on the call, you know, a lot of the work is around identity. So going into this fight, what's the identity that I want to embody? Like I know myself, I know my opponent, I know my strategy. What identity do I want? Do I want to be a brawler? Do I want to be swift and calm and sweet like Sugar Ray or Muhammad Ali? Like what identity? And we can always shift identities through the course of the fight if we do the work. But what we do is we then shift from the first stage, which is the activation, we get into the processing, and then we go into the channeling, but we're channeling it from a top identity. And in that state, we're able to do the visualization. We're able to see round by round. And now I no longer have to, whether I like my opponent or I dislike my opponent, it's no longer about my opponent and my like or dislike. It's about sharpening my weapon, myself, so that I can be at my best. I may be right. Maybe that guy slapped me in the head or said something vulgar, right? And I have a right to dislike that person, but I don't need to be right at my own expense. So if beating that person is what I want, how do I shape myself to get into that space? And that's why when we walk down the aisle, like one of the things that we're doing is we're doing serotonin breaths, you know, smiling while doing certain breathing sequences, while also taking in all the noise from the crowd. And instead of resisting it, using the energy of it, like accepting it. That goes back to the oneness component of flow. So that's really my answer to that. In my experience, it's not as much about your opponent as is about sharpening your weapon. And the only view of the opponent is they're here to make you better. Win or lose, they're here to make me better.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can see some fighters have got that and understood that, and others, especially if they're early in their game, they haven't quite figured that out.
What's important about figuring it out also real quick is if you look at like the Gracies, for example, you know, you can research a lot of their breath work practices on YouTube. In fact, they would do pre-fight. And essentially what they would do is they would warm up, get their body nice and hot, muscles loose. And then they would do certain breathing techniques to bring their heart rate down. And the goal is for them to walk into the ring at a 99 heartbeat rate, right? So while they're like maintaining a very low heart rate, their opponent is all psyched up and their opponent's heart rate's up to 125. So by round 2, the opponent's up to like 160, the fighter's up to 125.
Right.
And before you know it, we know if we're breathing faster over a period of time, we're going to run out of energy. We're not going to be getting the oxygen to the brain. Our response time is not going to be as good. And our powers and speed won't be there.
Interesting.
And that goes back to refining self as opposed to calling that other person an enemy. It's not about that other person.
Absolutely. I knew that Hoist Gracie actually was a big one for breathwork, wasn't he? As well as yoga. That leads me on to something that you mentioned there around that serotonin breath. I've never heard it called that before. I've kind of imagined it to be different, but you've also mentioned that again, this forcing of a smile that isn't, and that whole idea, I think, taps into this psychoneuroimmunology idea, doesn't it? And there's lots of methods of doing this physical action that tricks the brain into being something different. I use that smiling on a breath walk. If I feel low, I'll go for a 20-minute breath walk, fix a smile on my face. By the time I get home, I'm gigging inanely like some nut job, but at the same time, feeling amazing because I have. It's one of the few things that I say you can force, and you spoke about this earlier on in the course, or early on in the call, that force is never a good idea. And I often joke by saying that force is handy when you need to kick your door in because you've forgotten your key. But beyond that, force very rarely works, does it? But I do say that sometimes you do need to kind of force a smile on your face sometimes. And if you hold it there and retain it there after 20 minutes or whatever, you can totally change your state. It's a bit like the one we talk about flow, where you can lift your head, and that uplifting of your eyes, uplifting of the head, hold it for a minute, has an uplifting effect on your psychology. These simple tools are so easy to remember. And I think when people are in that, let's think about people now that are in an anxious state. When you're in an anxious state, it's important to know that your brain is not working as well as it should be. So it's difficult to remember ideas and practices that Dave or Mike might have been talking about enthusiastically and saying it's so easy, because your brain is no longer in that capacity to remember these wonderful things. But it is worthwhile practicing these ideas every day, just as a part of your life. The way you live your life, the way you flow through your life, making use of these practices will in turn help you create what I call a little mental invisible toolbox that after
like an automated response.
Your brain doesn't have to remember them anymore because it's a motor response. Exactly. And I think that's where people need, if they're watching this right now, that's kind of one of the ideas that we talk about, that if you keep practicing these simple tools, which on their own are so simple to remember, do them every day, eventually they will become a motor response, so that when you are in a stressful situation, you will remember at least one, and it will help you change your state.
So I love it. What I personally do every morning is a process called connect before I direct, or connect before I inspect. Are you there? Ooh. Okay. I don't know if it's still filming, but you're frozen, but I'll continue because I assume it probably is still filming. So the process is connect before you direct, which means before you take yourself from one place to another, connect with where you are. Before you correct yourself, connect to where you are. Before you inspect yourself, which means like, why am I doing this? Like, which creates a judgment of self, connect with where you are. I'm going to keep going. I know Dave left, but it still says live on custom live streaming service. So what that means is when you connect with where you are, David was mentioning earlier about his son and, a parent's role. So for a moment, imagine that your child is looking for you, right? And you're busy in the middle of doing something, but your child wants your attention. And as your child wants your attention, welcome back, brother. I kept going because I see it's still rolling.
Yeah, well done you. I'm not too sure where I went, but
so what I was sharing is an exercise to do, but also a mindset. Oh, you're frozen again. Okay, so Here's an exercise that you can do, and it's connect before you direct, inspect, or correct. So if that child is needing your attention as a parent, and they need you, but you're in the middle of doing something. So that child has a need, and they need their parent. But because you're so focused on something and you're so busy, you can't address that child's need. So you tell your child, go to your room. And as you send your child to the room, now they're there. And it's not as if that need goes away. And in fact, that need becomes rage. They start crying or they start isolating one way or another. They either withdraw or they go forward with like anger and tears. It's no different when we have an emotion such as anxiety. If we don't like that we're having that emotion and we try to suppress that emotion, it has what we refer to as that beach ball effect. And the beach ball effect is like when you take a beach ball and you push it underwater, you can't hold it underwater for long. It's going to boom, explode in your face at some point, right? That's the beach ball effect. And the same thing is what happens with our emotions when we suppress them. And so the idea that David was talking about earlier in terms of training yourself to create an automated response to having an unpleasant emotion, what I do for that is when I wake up in the morning, I roll out of bed and I stand up and I immediately feel what I'm feeling. So if I'm feeling anger for whatever reason, or if I'm feeling anxiety or joy, whatever it is, I first run over psychologically and say, it's okay that I'm feeling this. Now, my body doesn't want to say it's okay because it doesn't like the feeling, right? But I say, it's okay that I'm feeling this. And then I even make sense of it. Why wouldn't I be feeling this? I have a big day ahead of me. Of course, I'm feeling anxiety. Or maybe I don't even have a big day ahead of me. Why wouldn't I be feeling this? I have conditioned myself to feel this. So it's natural that I'm feeling it. In any way, I make peace with my non-peace because that's step one in transmuting the non-peace into peace. Step two is I meet myself where I am in terms of my posture and breath. So what that means is if I'm feeling anxiety, I don't, you oftentimes hear someone say, well, you have anxiety, take a deep breath. Well, here's what happens when you take a deep breath when you're feeling anxiety, right? Well, that breath that I just took is creating contraction in the body. Like, look how tight I'm getting, right? It's not like my lungs are expanding, they're contracting, right? So I breathe the way anxiety breathes. So oftentimes it's short and shallow and pretty fast. So, and I shift my posture to be anxiety. So now my thoughts are okay with being anxious, my breath is okay with being anxious, and my posture is okay with being anxious. Basically, what I've just done is I've sat down with my child and I have not made them wrong for whatever need that they may be having. Next, now that I've connected with my child, they feel heard, they feel validated, they feel empowered. All I do now is I slowly, not forcefully, I don't get over there quickly, begin to shift my thoughts first. So, what is a powerful way of looking at this? I know what a scarcity way of looking at it is, but what's a powerful way of looking at it? So I begin to shift so I see through the lens of power or strength. Then, in order to have that, who must I be? So I could say I must be focused or determined or energized or calm. Whatever the answer is in that moment, I begin to slowly walk. I've already shifted my mind. Now I begin to slowly walk my breathing. So here's the breathing. And I start walking it over to, let's say, calm. So instead of, you know, and as I'm doing that, I'm shifting my body language, movement. Now that I've shifted that, I've gone from anxious and I've walked into calm. I didn't try to jump across the road. Took my time getting across the road. Now, this could take a minute. It could take 3 minutes. It's rare for me that it ever takes more than 3 minutes, but for some in the beginning, it might. The time you take to train this will save you back so many hours and hours of being in an unhealthy, unproductive state. And it will also save your body and your mind from being in that state and the disease that comes from being and living in that stress space. So, David has probably having some technical difficulties. He's been an amazing partner to speak with on this. I think the last things I want to say is we all have the ability to discover parts of ourselves that we wish were there, that actually are there, but we've developed a belief that they're not there. And remember, beliefs are less than truths. What I mean by that is our beliefs can be changed to other beliefs. Truth is a truth. And so we have convinced ourselves that our beliefs are the truth, but we can change those beliefs. And I'll give an example. I love this example. You're walking down the street. You and I are walking down the street, and we see a house. And as we pass that house, I look at you and I say, careful. Every time you pass this house, you must be on point. You must be careful. And they're like, why? And you're like, why? I'm like, because people have been hurt here and abducted there. So be very careful. And you're freaked out now, right? And every day you have to pass that house in order to get to where you're going. Think of how that affects the way you think, affects the way you feel, and affects the actions you take. Then after 6 months of going by, you have me next to you again, and I look at you and I'm like, why do you seem freaked out walking by this house? And you're like looking at me like, are you crazy? Like, why wouldn't I be? I'm like, well, why are you? They're like, because like people have been abducted here. They've been hurt here. They've been abducted. And I look at you and I said, I was kidding when I said that, right? And you look at me like I am such a jerk, but the reason you're looking at me that way is because you believed me. And because you believed it, you developed this belief. And this belief has affected the way you think, feel, and the actions you've taken. Well, throughout our lives, we develop these beliefs. And whether they're based on experience and wrong perspective, when I mean wrong perspective, limited perspective. So you looked at an experience from a less than powerful lens. Like maybe you had a game and you lost, and you made that mean that you're not good, as opposed to making it mean that this is an opportunity for you to get better. Well, you develop that belief instead of this belief. And because you have this belief, every time you go to play a game, you're in fight or flight, you're freaked out. But if you have this belief that every time you win, you can only get better, and every time you lose, you can only get better. So you treat winning and losing the same, which is by saying, how do I get better from this? Well, in that space, you're a lot stronger. So wherever you are, assess where you are and ask yourself, what's the belief system that you have that's causing you to believe this is where you are and why you're there? And then ask yourself, what's a more powerful belief system? And this is where the flow code work comes in, and this is where David's work comes in, and my work comes in. And I urge all of us to really take a sincere look at that, because our life is too important to be left to chance. We must make choices, and we must choose success rather than hope for success. So with that said, I just want to go right back into flow code and understanding how the brain works, and knowing that we can put ourselves in flow state on demand. And I urge everyone to check out flow code, check out work that David's doing, check out the work that I'm doing. And if you have any questions, please come to us. We have a ton of resources for you to help you not only get into flow state on demand, but to be able to feel your brilliance, your strength, your unique gifts, your unique talents, and bring them to life.
because the happier, stronger, healthier, more confident you are, not only will you perform better and be healthier, but your impact on your family, your friends, and ultimately the world will be much greater. And that's what this is all about. So thank you all for tuning in. It's been an honor to be able to share. Please find me on Instagram at Mike, the letter J, Rosenfeld. So Mike J. Rosenfeld, MikeJRosenfeld. That's all one word, Mike J. Rosenfeld. And thank you so much for tuning in. Make it a great day.